What was so important about Grandma Hazel's blackberry bushes that she kept them behind a fence? Why did her will include a mysterious letter that couldn't be opened until her granddaughter's 13th birthday? And why are wealthy developers so eager to bulldoze the old farmhouse where 12-year-old Zinnia grew up? The secret hidden in those fields could change everything. If Zinnia can protect it long enough to discover the truth. Zinnia Wright stood in the doorway of her grandmother's farmhouse, unable to step inside. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, lighting up dust motes that danced in the air. 2 weeks had passed since they buried Grandma Hazel, but Zinnia still expected to hear the creak of her rocking chair or smell blackberry cobbler baking in the oven. But the house was silent. Empty. "You coming in, Sweet Pea?" Mrs. Abernathy called from the driveway. The older woman had been checking in on Zinnia since the funeral, bringing casseroles and making phone calls to distant relatives. "Just a minute," Zinnia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. At 12 years old, Zinnia wasn't sure what happened to kids whose only family was gone. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was 4. She barely remembered them. Just the sound of her mother's laugh and the scratch of her father's beard when he kissed her goodnight. After the accident, Grandma Hazel had stepped in, even though she was already 67 and lived on a small pension. "We'll figure it out together," Hazel had promised, her weathered hands enveloping Zinnia's tiny ones. And they had. For 8 years, the farmhouse had been their world. Hazel taught Zinnia how to tend the garden, how to identify birds by their songs, and how to find the North Star on clear nights. "As long as you can find that star," Hazel would say, "you'll never be lost." But now Zinnia felt completely lost. She finally stepped inside, her sneakers echoing on the worn wooden floor. The living room looked strange with sheets covering the furniture. Zinnia pulled one off the rocking chair by the window, Hazel's favorite spot. The chair still held the impression of her grandmother's small frame. On the mantel sat the last photo taken of them together at Zinnia's school science fair 3 months ago, before Hazel got sick. In the picture, Zinnia held a blue ribbon for her project on plant growth, while Hazel beamed beside her, thin but proud. Her silver hair was tied back in its usual braid, and her blue eyes, the same color as Zinnia's, sparkled with life. How torn. Could someone who looked so alive in a photo be gone forever? Zinnia climbed the creaky stairs to her grandmother's bedroom. The quilt on the bed was folded neatly, as if waiting for Hazel to return. On the bedside table sat a worn copy of Farmer's Almanac and Hazel's reading glasses. Zinnia picked up the glasses, their frames still warm as if recently worn. But that was impossible. "Zinnia," Mrs. Abernathy called from downstairs. "You doing okay up there?" "Yes, ma'am," she answered, quickly setting down the glasses. She opened the dresser drawer where her grandmother kept her treasures: a pearl necklace from her wedding day, a pocket watch that belonged to Zinnia's grandfather, who died before she was born, and a small box of Zinnia's baby teeth. "Sentimental old fool," Hazel would laugh whenever Zinnia caught her looking through these keepsakes. Memories are what make a life rich. Honeybee, not money. Money was something they never had much of. The farmhouse had been in the family for generations, but the land was more sentimental than profitable. Hazel had made ends meet with her pension, a small vegetable garden, and occasional sales of her famous blackberry preserves. Downstairs, Zinnia heard voices. Mrs. Abernathy was talking to someone, probably Mr. Phelps, the lawyer who had handled her parents' affairs, and now her grandmother's. Zinnia took one last look around the bedroom before heading down. In the kitchen, Mr. Phelps sat at the table, his leather briefcase open before him. "Hello, Zinnia," he said kindly. I hope this isn't a bad time." She shook her head, even though every time felt like a bad time lately. "I wanted to let you know that we'll be reading your grandmother's will tomorrow at my office. Your Uncle Desmond will be there." Uncle Desmond, her father's brother. Zinnia had met him only twice. He lived in the city with his wife Vivian and their children. They never visited, even when Hazel was sick. "What will happen to me?" Zinnia asked, her voice small. Mr. Phelps and Mrs. Abernathy exchanged looks. "That's one of the things we'll sort out tomorrow," Mr. Phelps said gently. "Your grandmother left specific instructions." Zinnia nodded, though she didn't really care about instructions or wills or what would happen to the farmhouse. She just wanted her grandmother back. After they left, Zinnia wandered onto the back porch. The sun was setting behind the blackberry bushes that lined the back of the property. Hazel's pride and joy. She had spent hours tending them, even on days when her arthritis made it difficult to walk. "These berries are special," she would tell Zinnia. "Someday you'll understand why." As darkness fell, Zinnia made her way back to Mrs. Abernathy's car. Tomorrow she would find out what her grandmother had left behind, but tonight she couldn't imagine anything that would fill the emptiness, in the house or in her heart. Mr. Phelps's office smelled like old books and coffee. Zinnia sat in a stiff leather chair that was too big for her, her feet barely touching the floor. Mrs. Abernathy sat beside her, patting her hand every few minutes as if to remind her she wasn't alone. But Zinnia felt alone, more alone than she'd ever been. Across the polished wooden table sat Uncle Desmond, tall and serious in a dark suit. Next to him was Aunt Vivian, who wore bright red lipstick and kept checking her watch. They had arrived in a shiny black car and had barely said hello to Zinnia before sitting down. "How much longer do we have to wait?" Aunt Vivian whispered to Uncle Desmond, not quite quietly enough. "We have that lunch reservation at 1. Uncle Desmond shushed her, then glanced at Zinnia with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it pity? Annoyance? They hadn't visited once during Grandma Hazel's illness, and now they seemed impatient to get through this meeting. 2 more people entered the room, Zinnia's cousins, Marcus and Patricia. They were older teenagers who Zinnia had met only at her parents' funeral. They both immediately pulled out their phones and started typing. "Now that everyone's here," Mr. Phelps said, adjusting his glasses, "we can begin." He opened a folder and pulled out several papers. "This is the last will and testament of Hazel May Wright," he read formally. "I'll summarize the main points." Zinnia tried to focus, but the words seemed to float around her. Mr. Phelps mentioned small amounts of money left to various people. $500 to the church, $200 to Mrs. Abernathy for her kindness, the old Chevy truck to Mr. Gonzalez next door, who had always helped with repairs. Uncle Desmond cleared his throat. "What about the property?" he asked. "The farmhouse and land?" Mr. Phelps looked up. "I'm getting to that." Aunt Vivian leaned forward. "We've already spoken with a developer who's interested in the area. That old place isn't worth much, but the land could fetch a decent price if sold as a package with the neighboring properties." Zinnia felt a sudden tightness in her chest. They wanted to sell her home? To tear it down? "I believe," Mr. Phelps continued, his voice firmer now, "that Mrs. Wright was aware of the development interest. She was quite specific about the property." He pulled out another document. "Before addressing the farmhouse, there's a personal matter." He turned to Zinnia. "Your grandmother left something specifically for you, Zinnia." He handed her a sealed envelope with her name written in Hazel's familiar handwriting. "What's that?" Uncle Desmond asked. "A private letter for Zinnia," Mr. Phelps explained, with instructions that it should be opened on her 13th birthday and not before. Zinnia ran her fingers over her name on the envelope. Her birthday was still 6 months away. What could be so important that Grandma wanted her to wait? "This is ridiculous," Uncle Desmond said, his voice rising. "We need to settle the estate now. The property needs to be dealt with." Mr. Phelps shook his head. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Hazel's instructions were very clear. The disposition of the farmhouse and surrounding 5 acres cannot be determined until after Zinnia's 13th birthday, when that letter is opened." 6 months? Aunt Vivian's eyes widened. "We have to wait 6 months to sell a worthless old farmhouse? That's absurd." "Mom," Patricia looked up from her phone. "Can we go soon? Tyler's having a pool party and—" "Not now," Aunt Vivian snapped. Mr. Phelps continued calmly. "Until then, the property remains in trust. No decisions can be made about selling it." "Uncle," Desmond's face reddened. "You're telling me that my mother left the decision about a valuable piece of real estate to a 12-year-old girl? That can't be legal." "It's perfectly legal," Mr. Phelps said. "And to be precise, she didn't leave the decision to Zinnia. The letter contains information that will determine what happens to the property. Until that information is revealed, everything stays as is." Zinnia clutched the envelope tighter. What secret had Grandma Hazel kept that was worth all this fuss? "And what about the girl?" Aunt Vivian asked, as if Zinnia wasn't sitting right there. "Where is she supposed to live for 6 months?" Mr. Phelps adjusted his glasses again. "Hazel appointed you and Desmond as Zinnia's legal guardians until she turns 18, or other arrangements can be made based on the contents of that letter." Uncle Desmond and Aunt Vivian exchanged looks of surprise. "Us?" Aunt Vivian said. "But we barely knew Hazel, and we have our own children to think about." "Nevertheless," Mr. Phelps said, "you are Zinnia's closest living relatives. Hazel's will is clear on this point." Zinnia felt like she might throw up. She was going to live with these people who couldn't even wait to sell her grandmother's house? Who complained about having to take care of her? "Fine," Uncle Desmond finally said. "The girl can stay with us until this letter business is sorted out. But I want it in writing that we have first right to purchase the property once this waiting period is over." Mr. Phelps shook his head. "I cannot guarantee that. As I said, the letter will determine what happens next." After the meeting, everyone stood in uncomfortable silence in the parking lot. Mrs. Abernathy hugged Zinnia tight and whispered, "Call me anytime, sweet pea. I'll come running." Zinnia nodded, fighting tears. She would be moving to the city tonight, with Uncle Desmond and Aunt Vivian. Mrs. Abernathy had already packed her clothes and a few precious belongings. As they drove away from the small town where she'd spent her whole life, Zinnia kept her hand in her pocket, fingers wrapped around the mysterious envelope. Whatever was inside had been important enough for Grandma Hazel to build her entire will around it. "What could you possibly have left behind?" Zinnia whispered to herself as she watched the familiar landscape disappear. The envelope seemed to warm beneath her touch, as if holding a promise that someday the emptiness might not feel so vast. In the front seat, Uncle Desmond and Aunt Vivian spoke in low voices about property values and development plans, but Zinnia wasn't listening. She was thinking about blackberry bushes, starry nights, and the secrets her grandmother had kept. Uncle Desmond and Aunt Vivian's house was 3 times the size of the farmhouse, with gleaming wooden floors and furniture that looked too perfect to sit on. Everything smelled like lemons, and nothing smelled like home. "Patricia, show Zinnia to the guest room," Aunt Vivian said as they entered. "The blue one at the end of the hall." Patricia sighed dramatically and looked up from her phone. "Do I have to? I'm in the middle of something." "Now please, Uncle Ow," Desmond said firmly. With another sigh, Patricia led Zinnia upstairs. "That's your bathroom," she said, pointing to a door. "Don't leave your stuff all over the counter. Mom hates that." The guest room was pretty, with pale blue walls and a white bedspread. But it felt as empty as Zinnia did inside. "Dinner's at 6. Mom doesn't like it when people are late," Patricia said, before leaving Zinnia alone with her small suitcase. Zinnia sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the envelope. The paper felt thin between her fingers. She was tempted to open it now to find out what was so important that Grandma Hazel had made everyone wait. But she remembered how her grandmother always said, "Promises are the one thing nobody can take from you." This was Grandma's last request, and Zinnia wouldn't break it. At dinner, Zinnia pushed food around her plate, while Uncle Desmond talked about work, and Marcus complained about his soccer coach. "Once we sell that old dump," Aunt Vivian said, reaching for her water glass, "we should take a vacation. Maybe Hawaii this time." Zinnia's fork clattered against her plate. "It's not a dump," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. It was the first time she'd spoken since arriving. "Excuse me?" Aunt Vivian raised an eyebrow. "The farmhouse. It's not a dump. It's my home." Uncle Desmond cleared his throat. "Was your home, Zinnia, and your Aunt Vivian didn't mean anything by it. How much do you think we can get for it?" Marcus asked, suddenly interested in the conversation. "The land is the valuable part," Uncle Desmond explained. "Valley View Developers has been buying up properties in that area. They want to build a shopping center and some fancy houses." Zinnia's stomach twisted. They would tear down the house where she'd spent her whole life, where her grandmother had told stories on the porch swing and taught her the names of stars. The blackberry bushes that Hazel had tended so carefully would be bulldozed for a shopping center. "May I be excused?" Zinnia asked, fighting back tears. "You've hardly touched your dinner," Aunt Vivian pointed out. "I'm not hungry." Uncle Desmond nodded, and Zinnia fled upstairs to the blue room that wasn't hers. She curled up on the bed and tried not to cry. 6 months felt like forever. 6 months until she could open the letter and find out what Grandma Hazel had planned. 6 months of living with people who called her home a dump and couldn't wait to sell it. The next morning, Zinnia started at her new school. The building was massive compared to her old school, with long hallways that all looked the same. In her first class, the teacher made her stand up and introduce herself. "My name is Zinnia Wright," she mumbled to 30 curious faces. "I just moved here from Millfield." "Millfield?" a boy snickered. "Isn't that where they still have dial-up internet?" A few kids laughed. Zinnia sank into her seat, cheeks burning. At lunch, she sat alone until a girl with curly brown hair and glasses plopped down beside her. "I'm Tansy," the girl said, offering a cookie. "Want half? They're way better than the cafeteria ones." Zinnia accepted the cookie with a small smile. "Thanks, I'm Zinnia." "I know, we have math together." Tansy bit into her half of the cookie. "So, why'd you move here in the middle of the school year?" "My grandmother died," Zinnia said. The words still felt strange in her mouth. "I had to move. In with my uncle and aunt." "Oh," Tansy's smile faded. "I'm sorry." Zinnia shrugged, not wanting to talk about it anymore. But something about Tansy's kind face made her add, "She left me a letter that I can't open until my birthday." Tansy's eyes widened. "Like a mystery letter? That's kind of cool. When's your birthday?" "November 18th, 6 months from now." "That's a long time to wait," Tansy said. "What do you think is in it?" Zinnia thought about the blackberry bushes, the hours her grandmother spent with them, and the whispered conversations she sometimes had on the phone late at night. "I don't know," she admitted, "but it must be important." That evening, Zinnia overheard Uncle Desmond on the phone in his office. The door was slightly open, and she couldn't help listening as she passed by. "Yes, I understand your company's timeline," he was saying. But the lawyer was clear. "No, not until after November 18th. I know it's a substantial offer. We're just as eager to move forward." Zinnia froze. They were already making plans to sell her home. In that moment, something hardened inside her. She would find a way to save the farmhouse, even if she didn't know how yet. Back in her room, she slipped the envelope from its hiding place under her mattress. Whatever secret lay inside, Zinnia was determined to protect it and her grandmother's memory until she could discover the truth. "Can we stop by the farmhouse on the way back from the grocery store?" Zinnia asked, trying to sound casual as she helped Aunt Vivian load bags into the car on Saturday morning. Aunt Vivian frowned. "Whatever for? There's nothing there you need." "I left some books," Zinnia lied, "for a school project." Aunt Vivian checked her watch. "I suppose we could make a quick stop, but we can't stay long. I have my book club at 2. Zinnia's heart raced as they drove the familiar road to Millfield. She'd been living with Uncle Desmond and Aunt Vivian for 2 weeks now, and each day made her miss the farmhouse more. The fancy house in the city never felt warm, no matter how high they set the thermostat. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, Zinnia had to stop herself from running to the door. The house looked abandoned already, with newspapers piled on. The porch and weeds sprouting in the garden. 10 minutes, Aunt Vivian said, not bothering to turn off the car engine. "I'll wait here." Zinnia hurried inside, breathing in the familiar scent of old wood and dried herbs that still lingered. She didn't really need any books. What she wanted was to check something she'd remembered last night while trying to sleep. The attic, Grandma Hazel had always kept important things in the attic, in an old trunk behind boxes of Christmas decorations. Zinnia had never paid much attention to it before, but now she wondered if there might be clues about the mysterious letter. She climbed the narrow stairs and pushed open the small door to the attic. Dust motes danced in the beams of light coming through the tiny window. There, in the corner behind tinsel-draped boxes, was the trunk. Zinnia knelt before it, holding her breath as she lifted the heavy lid. Inside were photo albums, old clothes, and a shoebox labeled "Important." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The box contained yellowed papers, a small velvet pouch, and a worn leather-bound book with a blackberry drawn on the cover in faded ink. "A diary," Zinnia whispered, carefully opening it. The first entry was dated 50 years ago, June 12, 1975. "Today I received my acceptance to State University's botany program. Full scholarship. My dream of becoming a botanist is finally within reach. I can hardly believe it. Dad says he's proud, but I can see the worry in his eyes. Who will help with the farm if I leave?" Zinnia flipped forward several pages. August 30th, 1975. "I gave up my scholarship today. Dad's back is worse, and Mom can't manage alone. The farm needs me. Professor Wilson said I could reapply next year, but we all know that's just kind words. Dreams don't pay bills or harvest crops. Still, I brought home some botany books from the library. Maybe I can study on my own." Zinnia turned the pages, fascinated by this glimpse of her grandmother as a young woman with dreams of college. She'd never known Hazel wanted to be a botanist. She skipped ahead many years, stopping at an entry from shortly after her parents' funeral. April 18th, 2016. "Zinnia fell asleep crying again tonight. My poor little bird, only 4 years old and already knows too much about loss. I held her until she drifted off, singing the lullabies I used to sing to her father. The social worker called today, asking about permanent arrangements, as if there's any question. Zinnia stays with me, no matter what. I may be old, but I can raise this child. We'll manage somehow. Tears filled Zinnia's eyes. She flipped forward a few more years. July 3, 2019. The Blackberry Project is showing promise. Specimen 17 survived the frost test and still produced full, sweet berries. Dr. Chen from the Agricultural Extension Office seemed impressed when he visited today. He thinks there might be commercial potential if I can stabilize the genetic line. I've been working late after Zinnia goes to bed. She doesn't need to know how tight money is getting. If this works, she'll never have to worry. Blackberry Project? Zinnia thought of the carefully tended bushes behind the house. Her grandmother had spent countless hours with them, especially in the last few years. She'd thought it was just a hobby. The last entry was from only a month before Hazel got sick. February 12, 2024, patent application submitted today. Dr. Chen helped with the paperwork. It's a long shot, but the new variety has everything we hoped. 4, cold resistance, disease immunity, and triple the usual yield. Mr. Phelps is helping me update my will. If anything happens to me before the patent comes through, everything is arranged for Zinnia. The letter explains it all. I just hope she understands why I kept it secret. A 12-year-old doesn't need the burden of knowing what's at stake. Zinnia, Aunt Vivian's sharp voice called from downstairs. Time's up! Quickly, Zinnia closed the diary and tucked it into her jacket. She put everything else back in the trunk exactly as she'd found it. As an afterthought, she grabbed a few random books from her bedroom shelf before hurrying downstairs. Did you find what you needed? Aunt Vivian asked as Zinnia slid into the car. Yes, Zinnia said, clutching the books to hide the diary beneath. Thank you for stopping. That night after dinner, Zinnia sat cross-legged on her bed and read the diary from cover to cover. The story it told was one she'd never known, of a young woman who gave up her dreams of becoming a scientist to take care of her family, of a mother who grieved for her son after Zinnia's father died, of a grandmother who worked secretly for years on a special project that might secure Zinnia's future. Many entries mentioned the Blackberry Project, experiments with cross-breeding different varieties, testing for hardiness and flavor, taking detailed notes on growth patterns. In the last year, the entries grew more excited as Hazel's work seemed to be paying off. The next day at school, Zinnia found Tansy in the library during lunch period. I found something, she whispered, showing Tansy the diary. My grandmother was working on some kind of special blackberry. She even applied for a patent. Tansy's eyes widened behind her glasses. A patent? Like, she invented something? I think she created a new kind of blackberry, one that can grow anywhere and produce more fruit. Zinnia's mind was racing. She said it could be worth a lot of money. Do you think that's what the letter is about? Tansy asked. It must be. And that's why she didn't want the farm sold. Because of the blackberry bushes. Zinnia felt a surge of hope. We need to find out more before my birthday. Tansy grinned. Like detectives? For the first time since her grandmother died, Zinnia felt a spark of excitement. Exactly like detectives. We need to figure out what Grandma Hazel was really doing with those blackberries before my uncle destroys everything. Operation Blackberry, Tansy said, her eyes gleaming with adventure. Count me in. My mom thinks I'm at your house working. On a science project, Tansy whispered as they pedaled their bikes down the country road toward the farmhouse. Well, we are kind of doing science, Zinnia replied. It had taken 2 weeks of planning, but they had finally managed to sneak away on a Saturday, when Uncle Desmond and Aunt Vivian were attending a charity event in the city. The April morning was cool and bright. Wildflowers dotted the roadside and birds called from the trees. For the first time in months, Zinnia felt a flutter of excitement instead of sadness. They hid their bikes behind the old maple tree at the edge of the property and approached the farmhouse cautiously, though no one was likely to be there. "It's beautiful," Tansy said, looking around at the weathered farmhouse and the rolling fields behind it. "I can see why you miss it." Zinnia nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "Come on, I want to show you the blackberry bushes." She led the way behind. The house, where neat rows of blackberry bushes stretched across nearly an acre of land. Most were just starting to show tiny green buds, but they wouldn't produce berries until summer. "Grandma spent hours out here," Zinnia explained. "She always said these bushes were special, but I never really thought about what she meant." Tansy adjusted her glasses. "According to your grandmother's diary, she was creating a new variety, right? One that could grow in harsh conditions." "That's what it sounded like." Zinnia moved closer to the bushes. "Look at these. There are little metal markers with numbers on them." Sure enough, small metal tags hung from different bushes, each stamped, with a number: 17, 23, 42, and so on. They match the specimen numbers in the diary, Tansy said excitedly. They walked along the rows, noting how some bushes looked different from others. Some had thicker stems, others had different shaped leaves. Zinnia stopped at a section that was separated from the others by a narrow path. "This area was always fenced off," she said, pointing to the posts where chicken wire had once been strung. "Grandma called it her special project. She took the fence down last year." In this section, the bushes looked more uniform, and all bore tags with the letter H, followed by numbers: H1, H2, H3. "H for hazel?" Tansy guessed. "Maybe." Zinnia knelt to examine the soil around the bushes. "Look, there are irrigation lines running to each plant, and the soil looks different here. It's darker." "Special soil mix, probably," Tansy said. "My mom does that with her roses." Zinnia stood up. "The shed might have more clues. Grandma kept all her gardening stuff there." The old wooden shed stood at the far edge of the garden. Inside, it smelled of earth and fertilizer. Dusty light filtered through the single window, illuminating shelves of tools, seed packets, and stacked terracotta pots. "Look at this!" Tansy pointed to a shelf filled with notebooks. Zinnia pulled one down and opened it. Inside were detailed notes written in her grandmother's neat handwriting. March 10th, specimen H7, showing excellent frost resistance. Temps dropped to 24 degrees last night, but buds remain viable. Soil pH 6.2, moisture level optimal. Page after page contained similar observations: soil conditions, growth patterns, weather notes, and detailed measurements of stem thickness and leaf size. "Your grandmother was doing serious science," Tansy said, flipping through another notebook. "Listen to this. Cross-pollination between specimen 42 and wild Arkansas stock showing promise. Second-generation fruits larger, sweeter, with improved seed-to-pulp ratio." Zinnia found a folder tucked between the notebooks. Inside were newspaper clippings about agricultural innovations, berry farming techniques, and announcements of competitions at state fairs. One headline caught her eye: "Small-scale farmers struggle as climate shifts impact crops." She was trying to create blackberries that could grow even when the weather gets weird, Zinnia realized. The diary said they were cold-resistant and disease-immune. Tansy nodded excitedly. And if they produce more berries than regular plants, that would be super valuable. Farmers would pay a lot for plants like that. Zinnia remembered the final diary entry: "Patent application submitted today." Could her grandmother's BlackBerry project really be worth enough money to change her future? They continued searching the shed, finding more evidence of Hazel's work, carefully labeled seed packets, charts tracking berry size and yield over, multiple seasons, even a microscope stored in a protective case. "Your grandmother was like a real scientist," Tansy said admiringly. "I never knew," Zinnia replied softly. "I mean, I knew she loved these plants, but I didn't understand what she was doing." Suddenly, they heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Zinnia peered through the dusty window and gasped. "It's Uncle Desmond! Quick, hide everything!" They scrambled to return the notebooks and papers to their places before slipping out the shed's back door. But they weren't fast enough. As they rounded the corner of the shed, Uncle Desmond spotted them. "Zinnia!" he called, striding toward them with an angry expression. "What are you doing here? And who is this?" "This is my friend Tansy," Zinnia said, her heart pounding. I wanted to show her where I used to live." Uncle Desmond's eyes narrowed. "You know you're not supposed to be here without permission." His gaze shifted to the shed door, which remained slightly ajar. "What were you looking at in there?" "Nothing," Zinnia said quickly. "Just some old gardening stuff." Uncle Desmond pushed past them and entered the shed. When he emerged moments later, he was holding one of the notebooks. "These aren't yours to go through," he said sternly. "Get in the car. I'm taking you both home." "But our bikes," Tansy began. "I'll put them in the trunk." Now, as they drove back to the city in uncomfortable silence, Zinnia stared out the window, thinking about what they'd discovered. Uncle Desmond had taken the notebook from them, but she still had her grandmother's diary, and now she knew what to look for. She remembered something her grandmother had said once while working in the garden. "Sometimes the most precious things look ordinary until you know what to look for." Now Zinnia understood what she had meant. The blackberry bushes weren't just plants. They were Grandma Hazel's legacy, her life's work. And somehow, Zinnia had to protect them. "You're grounded for 2 weeks," Aunt Vivian announced over dinner that evening. "No going to friends' houses, no extracurricular activities." Uncle Desmond nodded in agreement. Trespassing on the property without permission was completely irresponsible. "It's my home," Zinnia said quietly, pushing peas around her plate. "How can I trespass in my own home?" "It was your home," Uncle Desmond corrected. "And until decisions are made about the property, you need permission to go there." Zinnia wanted to argue, but knew it would only make things worse. Patricia smirked from across the table, clearly enjoying her cousin's trouble. "What were you really doing there?" Uncle Desmond asked. "Those notebooks in the shed. They looked like research notes." Zinnia's heart skipped. "Grandma liked gardening," she said carefully. "She kept records of her plants." "Gardening," Uncle Desmond repeated, exchanging a look with Aunt Vivian. "My mother never mentioned any special interest in plant science." After dinner, alone in her room, Zinnia pulled out the diary from its hiding place under her mattress. She reread the entries about the BlackBerry project, searching for any clues she might have missed. The mysterious letter sat beside it, still sealed. "5 months until my birthday," she whispered, running her finger along the edge of the envelope. The next day at school, Zinnia couldn't speak to Tansy except during lunch period, when they huddled at a corner table. "I'm really sorry you got grounded," Tansy said. "Was your uncle super mad?" "Pretty mad." Zinnia glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "But I've been thinking, we need to learn more about plant patents. Like, how valuable are they really?" "I had the same idea," Tansy grinned. "I did some research last night. Did you know a guy named Floyd Zager made millions from patenting new kinds of peaches and plums, and there's a type of apple called Honeycrisp that earns millions in patent royalties every year. Zinnia's eyes widened. Millions? From fruit? Tansy nodded. If a farmer wants to grow patented varieties, they have to pay the patent holder. And if your grandmother really created a blackberry that can survive bad weather and produce more fruit, that could be super valuable. That must be what's in the letter, Zinnia whispered. Information about the patent. As weeks passed, Zinnia marked off days on a small calendar she kept hidden in her desk drawer. 4 months until her birthday. Then 3. Meanwhile, she threw herself into learning everything she could about plants. For her science project, she chose to study plant hybridization, using books from the school library and carefully avoiding mentioning blackberries specifically. Her teacher, Ms. Lockhart, was impressed by her work. "This is graduate-level research, Zinnia," she said, looking over the project display. "What made you interested in plant breeding?" "My grandmother," Zinnia replied. "She loved plants." Ms. Lockhart smiled. "Well, she clearly passed that passion on to you. Did you know that plant patents can be incredibly valuable? Some companies pay millions for the rights to grow certain varieties." Zinnia tried to look only mildly interested. "Really? I didn't know that." "Oh, yes. I used to work in agricultural science before teaching, creating a new plant variety that has commercial value. That's like striking gold these days, especially with climate change affecting crops." That conversation confirmed what Zinnia already suspected. If her grandmother had created a valuable, new blackberry variety, it could explain why the letter was so important, and why she had made special arrangements in her will. At home, things remained tense. Uncle Desmond often had business calls about the property and development plans. Twice, men in suits visited to discuss what they called the project. Each time, Zinnia tried to listen at doors but only caught fragments of conversation. As soon as the waiting period ends, see significant investment opportunity. Clear the land by December. One evening in October, 2 months before her birthday, Zinnia overheard a more heated conversation in Uncle Desmond's office. Valley View is getting impatient. A man's voice said, "They have deadlines for breaking ground." "I understand," Uncle Desmond replied, but the lawyer was clear. "Nothing can proceed until after November 18th. My hands are tied." 2 months is a lot of money in delays. "Trust me, no one wants this resolved more than I do," Uncle Desmond said. "The properties on either side have already sold. Once we add this parcel, the development can proceed." Zinnia's stomach tightened. They were still planning to sell the farmhouse and land as soon as they could. Whatever was in her grandmother's letter, it needed to be something that could stop them. That night, she took out the letter and held it under her lamp. If only she could see through the paper somehow, get a hint of what was inside. 2 more months, she whispered to herself, returning the letter to its hiding place. Just 2 more months. On her desk sat the countdown calendar, with November 18th circled in red. Beside it lay her science project notes and a small drawing she'd made of Grandma Hazel's special blackberry bushes. Zinnia touched the drawing gently. "I won't let them destroy your life's work, Grandma. I promise." 3 days before her birthday, Zinnia woke with a start. She'd been dreaming about Grandma Hazel, so vividly that she could almost smell the familiar lavender soap her grandmother always used. In the dream, they had been walking through the blackberry fields together. Hazel had turned to her and said, clear as day, "The treasure isn't hidden. It's growing right before your eyes." Zinnia sat up, heart pounding. It wasn't just a dream, it was something her grandmother had actually said to her once when Zinnia was looking for Easter eggs in the garden. She'd been searching in all the complicated hiding spots, and Hazel had laughed and pointed to an egg sitting in plain sight on top of a fence post. "The treasure isn't hidden," she'd said. "It's right before your eyes." Zinnia couldn't go back to sleep. She felt certain that her subconscious was trying to tell her something important. 3 days suddenly seemed too long to wait. She needed to see the blackberry bushes again. Now, it was a crazy idea. But once it took hold, she couldn't shake it. The next morning, she told Aunt Vivian that Tansy had invited her for a sleepover to work on a big science project due the following week. "You'll have to ask your uncle," Aunt Vivian said, barely looking up from her magazine. Uncle Desmond was distracted with work calls, but nodded approval when she mentioned a school project. Zinnia felt a twinge of guilt for lying, but reminded herself what was at stake. She texted Tansy, "Need your help. Cover for me tonight. If anyone calls, I'm at your house working on science." Tansy replied immediately, "What are you really doing?" "Going to the farmhouse. Need to check something. We'll explain tomorrow." "That's dangerous. At least let me come with you." "Too risky. Please, just cover for me. Trust me." After a pause, "Okay, but be careful. Text me when you're safe." Instead of going to Tansy's after school, Zinnia took a bus to the edge of town, then another that went near Millfield. She had to walk the final 2 miles to the farmhouse, arriving as the sun was beginning to set. The property looked different in the fading light, wilder, with tall grass waving in the evening breeze. Zinnia felt a chill as she approached the dark house, but she wasn't afraid. This place could never scare her. She bypassed the house and went straight to the blackberry fields behind it. In the gathering twilight, she pulled out the small flashlight she'd brought and made her way to the special section that had been fenced off, the area with bushes marked H1, H2, and so on. Now that she knew what to look for, she studied the plants more carefully. Even in November, with no berries on the vines, she could see differences between these plants and ordinary blackberry bushes. The stems were thicker, the thorns spaced differently. Some had unusual leaf patterns. In the Iowa moonlight, the H section looked almost silvery compared to the other bushes. Zinnia knelt beside the plant marked H1, which seemed to be the oldest and largest. Its branches spread wider than the others, and the main stem was as thick as her thumb. "What makes you so special?" she whispered, running her fingers gently along a branch. Then she noticed something at the base of the plant. The soil looked disturbed, as if someone had been digging there recently. Zinnia shined her flashlight directly on the spot and saw a corner of metal gleaming in the dirt. Heart racing, she carefully brushed away the soil and found a small metal box about the size of a paperback book, buried beside the main root of the H1 plant. The box had a simple latch, but no lock. With trembling fingers, Zinnia opened it. Inside was a sealed plastic bag containing several papers. She pulled them out and unfolded the top document. "United States Patent Application," read the heading. Below were forms filled out in her grandmother's neat handwriting with terms Zinnia didn't fully understand. Novel rubus cultivar, cold hardy, disease-resistant, enhanced yield. Attached were photographs of blackberries, large, glossy fruits that looked more perfect than any Zinnia had seen before, and detailed diagrams of plant structures. There were also letters from someone named Dr. Chen at the State Agricultural Extension Office discussing test results and market potential. One phrase jumped out: potential commercial value exceeding standard varieties by 300–400%. Zinnia's breath caught. This was it. proof that her grandmother had created something valuable. But why bury the papers here instead of keeping them with her other documents? The answer came in a handwritten note paper clipped to the patent application. If you're reading this, Zinnia, you've found what matters most. The original plant, H1, is the mother of all the others. The patent application proves what we created, but this plant is the living proof. Keep it safe. A distant sound made Zinnia look up. Headlights were coming down the long driveway to the farmhouse. Quickly, she stuffed the papers back in the plastic bag and returned them to the metal box. She reburied it exactly where she'd found it, making sure to smooth the soil so it looked undisturbed. Then she darted behind a large oak tree at the edge of the field, crouching low. A black car pulled up to the farmhouse. Uncle Desmond stepped out, along with a man Zinnia had never seen before, tall and serious-looking in an expensive coat. "This is the property," Uncle Desmond said, gesturing around. 5 acres total, with the house included. "The house would be demolished, of course," the man replied. "Our plans call for maximizing the buildable area." They walked around the side of the house, coming in Zinnia's direction. She pressed herself against the tree trunk, hardly daring to breathe. "What about these?" the stranger asked, pointing at the blackberry bushes. "Just some berry bushes my mother planted," Uncle Desmond said dismissively. "All of this would be cleared." The man nodded, making notes on a tablet. "Not a problem. This could all be gone by next month, assuming we close on schedule." Zinnia bit her lip to keep from crying out. They were planning to destroy everything: the ivy house, the gardens, and most importantly, the blackberry bushes that represented her grandmother's life work. She had to get back to the city with what she'd learned. Somehow, she had to protect Grandma Hazel's legacy until her birthday, only 3 days away. The morning of Zinnia's 13th birthday dawned clear and cold. She'd barely slept the night before, anticipation and worry keeping her mind racing. Today was the day she could finally open her grandmother's letter. At breakfast, Uncle Desmond surprised her by announcing, "We'll open your grandmother's letter after dinner tonight. I've invited Mr. Phelps to join us." "Mr. Phelps?" Zinnia looked up from her cereal. "The lawyer?" "Yes. And I've also asked a representative from Valley View Developers to attend. It's time to finalize the arrangements for the property." Zinnia's spoon clattered against her bowl. "You invited a real estate developer to my birthday?" Aunt Vivian placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's just business, dear. After we understand whatever is in that letter, we can move forward with the sale." "But," Zinnia began. "No arguments," Uncle Desmond said firmly. "This has been delayed long." "Enough!" As soon as breakfast ended, Zinnia rushed to her room and called Tansy. "They're opening the letter tonight, and they invited the developer." "The developer who wants to bulldoze everything?" Tansy asked. "Yes." Zinnia paced across her room. "I have to do something. They're planning to sell the farmhouse immediately." After a moment of thought, Tansy suggested, "Can you call Mr. Phelps yourself before the meeting?" "That's brilliant." Zinnia remembered how the lawyer had been firm about following Grandma Hazel's instructions. Perhaps he would help. It took some detective work to find his number, but eventually Zinnia located his business card tucked inside her grandmother's diary. She called from the landline when her aunt and uncle were both out of the house. "Mr. Phelps, this is Zinnia Wright." "Zinnia, happy birthday. I'll be seeing you this evening, I understand." "Yes, that's why I'm calling," she said quickly. Uncle Desmond invited someone from Valley View Developers to be there when we opened the letter. A pause. "Did he now? I wasn't aware of that. They want to sell the farmhouse right away. But I found something." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I think Grandma Hazel's blackberry bushes are really important. She applied for a patent. There are papers buried by one of the plants. Slow down, Zinnia, Mr. Phelps said gently. I think I understand. Your grandmother discussed her work with me when we prepared her will. So you know about the blackberries? I know she was very proud of what she'd accomplished, and very concerned that it be protected. Can you help me? Zinnia asked, her voice small. I'll be there tonight, he assured her. Try not to worry. The day crawled by. Aunt Vivian made a small birthday cake, and there were a few presents. New clothes, books, a gift card. But Zinnia could barely focus. All she could think about was the letter and what would happen that evening. At 6 o'clock, Mr. Phelps arrived, followed shortly by a man who introduced himself as Roy Thornton from Valley View Developers. Everyone gathered in the dining room. After dinner, the mysterious letter sat in the center of the table like a time bomb. Well, Uncle Desmond said with forced cheerfulness, the day has finally arrived. Zinnia is 13, and we can at last open my mother's letter and resolve this matter. Mr. Phelps nodded. Yes, Hazel was very specific about this date. He turned to Zinnia. Since the letter is addressed to you, would you like to open it? With trembling fingers, Zinnia picked up the envelope. Everyone watched as she carefully broke the seal and unfolded several pages of her grandmother's familiar handwriting. Would you like to read it aloud? Mr. Phelps suggested. Zinnia nodded and began. My dearest Zinnia, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you, and you've turned 13 today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to see you growing into the wonderful young woman I know you'll become. There's something important I need to tell you about your future. For the past 10 years, I've been working on developing a new variety of blackberry. Not just as a hobby, but as a scientist. I crossbred different species, selecting for hardiness, disease resistance, and yield. It took thousands of attempts, but I finally succeeded. The bushes marked with H in our garden are special. They can grow in poor soil and harsh weather. They produce 3 times more berries than standard plants, and the fruit is sweeter and larger. Most importantly, they're resistant to the diseases that are devastating berry crops as our climate changes. 6 months before I wrote this letter, I submitted a patent application for this new variety. Dr. Chen at the Agricultural Extension Office helped me. If the patent is approved, and Dr. Chen believes it will be, this new blackberry variety could be worth a great deal of money. Companies will pay for the right to grow these plants. Farmers around the world could benefit from them. I've named the variety Zinnia's Star, after you and the nights we spent stargazing together. All of this, the patent rights, the original plants, and the farmhouse property, I leave to you, Zinnia. But you cannot sell the farmhouse or the land until you turn 18 and can make that decision for yourself. The original plants must be protected, as they are the source of all future plants. Mr. Phelps has arranged for a trust to manage the patent proceeds until you're of age. He will explain the details. The farmhouse and land will be maintained from these funds, and your education and needs will be provided for. I know this is a lot to understand at 13, but I've watched you grow into a thoughtful, caring person. I trust you to be the guardian of this legacy. Remember that the true value of what I've created isn't measured in money, but in how it might help people grow food in a changing world. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Grandma Hazel silence fell over the room as Zinnia finished reading. She looked up to see Uncle Desmond's face had grown pale. Aunt Vivian's mouth hung open slightly. Mr. Thornton from Valley View was frowning and checking his phone. Mr. Phelps cleared his throat. "I have additional documents concerning the patent application. It was approved last month, quite quickly, as these things go. Several agricultural companies have already expressed interest in licensing the rights." "How much?" Uncle Desmond began, then stopped to clear his throat. "What kind of value are we talking about?" "Initial projections suggest royalties could exceed several $100,000 annually," Mr. Phelps said. "Possibly much more as production scales up. Climate-resistant crops are extremely valuable in today's market." Mr. Thornton stood abruptly. "I think I should excuse myself. It seems this property won't be available after all." After he left, Uncle Desmond turned to Mr. Phelps. "This is absurd. A child can't possibly manage such assets." "She won't have to," Mr. Phelps replied calmly. "As Hazel's letter mentioned, a trust has been established. I will serve as trustee until Zinnia comes of age. The farmhouse and the original blackberry plants will be protected. Zinnia's education and needs will be provided for. And when she turns 18, she can decide what to do with her inheritance." Uncle Desmond looked as if he might argue further, but Aunt Vivian placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. Zinnia sat quietly, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of pride and relief. Her grandmother hadn't just left her money. She'd left her a legacy of knowledge, perseverance, and love. And somehow, even after she was gone, Grandma Hazel had found a way to keep their home safe. 6 months had passed since Zinnia's birthday. Spring had returned to the farmhouse, bringing with it new green leaves, wildflowers in the meadow, and tiny buds on the blackberry bushes. Zinnia stood at the edge of the garden, watching as Mrs. Abernathy hung laundry on the line. After the reading of the letter, arrangements had been made quickly. The trust Mr. Phelps managed provided funds for maintaining the farmhouse, and Mrs. Abernathy had happily agreed to move in as Zinnia's guardian. Coming home had felt like taking a deep breath after holding it for too long. "Zinnia!" a familiar voice called. Tansy pedaled up the driveway on her bike, her curly hair bouncing beneath her helmet. "Are the scientists here yet?" "They're supposed to arrive at 10, Zinnia replied, checking her watch. It was her third meeting with researchers from Heartland Agricultural Cooperative, one of several companies interested in licensing Grandma Hazel's blackberry variety. As if on cue, a car pulled into the driveway. Dr. Chen, whom Zinnia now knew well, stepped out along with 2 colleagues. Dr. Chen had been Hazel's contact at the Agricultural Extension Office and had helped with the patent application. Now he was helping Zinnia understand her grandmother's work. "Good morning, Ms. Wright," he said formally, always treating Zinnia with professional respect despite her age. "The first test fields are showing excellent results. The plants are thriving in conditions where traditional varieties struggle." They walked together to the special section of the garden where the original H plants grew. Now a small sign marked the area. "Zinnia's Star, Original Stock." "Your grandmother was a remarkable scientist," Dr. Chen told her, as his colleagues took samples and measurements. Self-taught, but brilliant in her approach, these plants could help farmers in regions affected by climate change. Zinnia nodded, pride warming her chest. In the months since her birthday, she'd learned so much about her grandmother's work. The patent royalties were indeed substantial, enough to maintain the farmhouse, provide for Zinnia's education through college, and still have plenty left over. But more importantly, she understood now why the work had mattered so much to Hazel. "Wasn't just about the money," Zinnia said aloud. She wanted to make something that would help people. Dr. Chen smiled. That's exactly what she told me when we first met. I'm not doing this to get rich, she said. I'm doing it to make a difference. After the scientists left, Tansy and Zinnia sat on the porch swing, drinking lemonade made from Mrs. Abernathy's family recipe. Have you heard from your uncle and aunt? Tansy asked. Zinnia shook her head. Since the reading of the letter, Uncle Desmond and Aunt Vivian had kept their distance. They'd been polite, but clearly disappointed when Zinnia moved back to the farmhouse. Not, really. Marcus texted me about a video game once. Patricia hasn't spoken to me at all. Their loss, Tansy said loyally. You're way more interesting than they are. Zinnia smiled, but felt a twinge of sadness. She wished her family could have been happy for her instead of just wanting the property. Maybe someday they could repair their relationship. But for now, she had a new family of sorts. Mrs. Abernathy, Mr. Phelps, who visited regularly, Dr. Chen and his team, and of course, Tansy. School had changed too. When Zinnia returned to her old school in Millfield, her science teacher, Mr. Roberts, had been fascinated by her grandmother's work. He'd helped Zinnia start a garden club where students learned about plant breeding and sustainability. Remember when we used to sneak around playing detective? Tansy laughed. Now you're practically a professional botanist. Not yet, Zinnia replied, but maybe someday. I'm thinking about studying plant science in college. That evening, while looking through an old recipe book of her grandmother's, Zinnia found a folded note she hadn't seen before. Her heart skipped as she recognized Hazel's handwriting. For Zinnia, when you understand the Blackberry legacy, look to the stars for one final secret. Some treasures can't be measured in patents or money. This one is just for you, my sweet girl. Look to the stars? Zinnia whispered. What could that mean? She turned the note over, looking for more clues, but found none. Another mystery from Grandma Hazel. But this time, Zinnia wasn't worried. Whatever the secret was, she had time to discover it. Outside, the sun was setting. Soon the stars would appear, the same stars she and her grandmother had studied together on countless evenings. Zinnia stepped onto the porch and looked up at the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, the first star was about to appear. And somewhere, Zinnia believed, her grandmother was watching over her, proud of the legacy they now shared. I'll figure it out, Grandma, she promised softly. Whatever secret the stars hold, I'll find it. The first star appeared, bright against the deepening blue. Zinnia remembered what her grandmother always told her. As long as you can find the North Star, you'll never be lost. She wasn't lost anymore. She was exactly where she belonged. 1 year to the day after Grandma Hazel's funeral, Zinnia sat alone on the porch swing. Mrs. Abernathy had offered to stay with her, but Zinnia had asked for some time to herself. This wasn't a day for sadness, she decided. It was a day for remembering. The evening air was cool and sweet, with the scent of spring flowers. Zinnia gently pushed the swing with her foot, listening to its familiar creak. How many nights had she sat here with her grandmother, looking up at the stars while Hazel told stories about constellations? The Big Dipper isn't actually a constellation, Hazel would say. It's an asterism, a pattern within the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear. Zinnia smiled at the memory. Her grandmother had loved the stars almost as much as she'd loved her plants. Every clear night, they would identify the constellations together. Orion the hunter, Cygnus the swan, Cassiopeia the queen. Cygnus had been Hazel's favorite. See how it forms a cross in the sky, she would say. Some call it the Northern Cross. To me, it represents eternal love. Wings spread wide, never failing. Zinnia looked up at the darkening sky. Soon the stars would appear, including Cygnus, visible in the spring and summer months. "Look to the stars for one final secret," she whispered, repeating the words from her grandmother's note. Suddenly, a thought struck her. Rising from the swing, Zinnia walked to the hill behind the house. Their favorite stargazing spot. From here, you could see the entire property, including the blackberry fields. As the last light faded, Zinnia stood on the hilltop, looking down at the layout of the blackberry bushes. In the dimming light, a pattern began to emerge that she'd never noticed before. The special H section of bushes wasn't planted in simple rows like the rest. They formed a shape. Zinnia's breath caught. The bushes were arranged in the pattern of Cygnus, the swan constellation. 5 main bushes created the cross shape, with smaller plants filling in the pattern. "The stars," she whispered. Grandma Hazel had planted her special blackberries in the shape of her favorite constellation. But there was more. At the center of the cross, where the heart of the swan would be, was a small clearing that Zinnia had never paid attention to before. It looked deliberately empty, as if something belonged there. Guided by instinct, Zinnia made her way down the hill and through the blackberry field to that empty spot. The ground looked different here, recently disturbed, perhaps. Kneeling, she began to dig with her hands. About a foot down, her fingers struck something solid, a metal box, larger than the one that had contained the patent papers. With trembling hands, Zinnia pulled it from the earth and opened it. Inside was a collection of treasures, old photographs of her parents that she'd never seen before, a pressed flower from her parents' wedding, her father's high school graduation tassel, a tiny pair of baby shoes that must have been hers, and a letter written in Hazel's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Zinnia, if you've found this, you've solved my final puzzle. I always knew you would. There's something you should know about our home. This land has been in our family for 5 generations. My great-grandparents settled here after traveling west in a covered wagon. They planted the first crops, dug the well by hand, and built the original part of the farmhouse. Every generation has added something to this legacy. My grandfather planted the oak trees that line the drive. My father improved the soil through years of careful stewardship. I contributed my blackberries. The true treasure of this place isn't the valuable berry plants or the patent royalties, though I'm glad those will make your life easier. The real treasure is the love that has sustained our family through hardships and the connection to the land that has nourished us. I planted the special blackberries in the pattern of Cygnus, the eternal love constellation, as a reminder that love endures even when we're gone, just as stars continue to shine long after they've burned out. Whatever you choose to do with your life, remember that you come from a line of people who worked hard, loved deeply, and always tried to leave the world better than they found it. You are my legacy, Zinnia, more precious than any plant I could create. All my love. Always. Grandma Hazel. Tears streamed down Zinnia's face as she clutched the letter to her chest. Around her, the blackberry bushes, planted in the shape of eternal love, rustled softly in the evening breeze. Above, the stars of Cygnus shone down on the girl and the legacy she'd inherited. Not just valuable plants or a historic farmhouse, but the knowledge that she was part of something larger than herself. A chain of love and care that stretched back generations and would continue through her. Zinnia looked up at the starry sky. "I understand now, Grandma," she whispered. The small, ordinary-looking blackberry bushes had turned out to be a treasure that would provide financial security. But the real gift Hazel had left behind was something money could never buy. The Yebu lesson that with love and determination, something small could grow into something that would nourish many for years to come. Clutching the box of family treasures, Zinnia made her way back to the farmhouse, her path lit by starlight. She wasn't alone. She never had been. That's the end of our story. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Where are you listening from? I'd love to know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives me the motivation to create more stories like this one.